Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I have a very informative upload to share with you. One that I think anyone who lives in the United States or worldwide, for that matter, should hear. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does matter, and it does help. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Briefly, before we get into the upload, I had something completely different planned for this upload today. Regardless of what people may think, it is very hard to constantly have content and not repeat it. I drove up to Horicon today, which is where Tom Mezek disappeared. I wanted to go up into Lily Pond Road and then Lily Pond Trail, and I had something really interesting that I wanted to do. And when I got up there, there was a kind of trail lockdown. There was 2 NCON, or DNR as other states call them. We call them NCON up here in New York. And 3 state troopers cars up there, actually SUVs, and 1 unmarked vehicle. Apparently, they were doing training exercises. I guess from what I've learned and read, the state of New York still goes up there periodically to train new recruits or cadets, whoever they are, on tracking and finding missing persons. Or they go up there and they will proceed to look for any signs of Tom Mezek periodically. It's been since 2015 since he has disappeared. We're talking almost 7 years now. I did the 6-year anniversary on November 15th last year. I don't know what they could find unless they come across a body, a gun, or his CB, or his black and red checkered hat or clothing. I don't know. But it was pretty weird when I went up there, and I actually talked to one of the NCON officers, and he was a younger guy, and he just said routine maintenance on a trail that involves 2 NCON vehicles, 3 state police SUVs, and an unmarked vehicle. Okay. So instead of what I was going to do up there, I may go back up there in the next couple of days and see if their routine maintenance is done. I figured since the last couple of days, at the second half, I've been talking about Tom Castello, and Phil Schneider, I figured, heck, let's go into the Battle of Dulce. The battle at Dulce to stop an alien breeding program. Earth Defense Headquarters, Technical Brief, Captain Mark Richards. Using thousands of young women government scientists, the secret government purportedly labored alongside an alien force, work out the sundry ways the general population could be brought under the ultimate totalitarian control that would leave humanity as little more than farm animals to be used for breeding. All of which began in 1947, a treaty signed by President Harry Truman that set in motion a plan where the elite obtained alien technology in exchange for permitting the aliens to abduct human subjects for their diabolical research. In time, the elite would be allowed to survive to become the overlords of the human sheep, under ultimate control of the aliens, like dogs that watch the sheep on a human farm. Located almost 2 miles beneath Archuleta Mesa on the Jicarilla Apache Indian Reservation near Dulce, New Mexico, was an installation classified so secret its existence would be one of the most protected realities in the world. There was the Earth's first main joint United States government/alien biogenetics laboratory. Others existed in Colorado, Nevada, and Arizona, not to mention in a number of other locations like Afghanistan and Russia, but Dulce is and was the largest. In an era when the officers in charge of the major military units were still part of a generation that looked on young women, potential mothers, as a treasure to be protected, to learn that thousands of young females were being abducted and even created for use as sex slaves by aliens was simply too much for such men to allow to continue. The turning point came when National Security Advisor Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski met President Jimmy Carter in the White House on June 14, 1977, with a number of other intelligence operatives and leaders, to bring the president up to speed on a number of top-secret programs, including Project Aquarius and the work being done at Dulce, Area 51, and other secret bases. Brzezinski, a member of the power elite that backed the Gray, never guessed that the president would be so shocked that he would soon turn to trusted military advisors in the military intelligence community for options of how to stop what had been going on. The National Security Agency had been secretly fighting the alien cause and the humans that worked for or with the aliens since its establishment in the mid-50s. Project Aquarius was originally established in 1953 by order of President Eisenhower under control of NSC and MJ-12, Majestic 12. In 1966, the project's name had been changed from Project Gleam, which became Project Aquarius, and portions of it went into deep cover, hidden even from the CIA and the NSC. At that point, the NSA had opened Department X to identify and study all alien or enemy operations that could be a threat to the United States or the human race in general. Department Z to react and neutralize any sort of threat to the United States or the human race. Under secret presidential order signed by Jimmy Carter, the NSA, Department Z, the newly established Delta Force, and a specially handpicked group of Air Force SOC Navy SEAL, and Army Rangers were organized for a mission so secret that not even command officers were told what it was about until the night of the attack. The only attack team leaders who knew what this would be about were the men involved in the NSA Department Z, who had been involved with fighting aliens for years. The commanding officer of the attack was none other than Captain Mark Richards, son of infamous Dutchman Major Ellis Lloyd Richards, who had been the commander of international security since Admiral Chester W. Nimitz died in 1966. By 1978, the NSA Department X was warning the human commanders of new programs starting at Dulce that were so frightening, even seasoned men of war were shocked. Thousands of young human females were being created in test tubes to be slaves for the aliens, but these clones were proving to be less than satisfying for the aliens because they did not suffer the same way that once free victims did. They could be engineered to provide better tools for some of the stranger life forms, but they were proving to be nearly mindless and thus couldn't react with the fear that normal young women could. For that reason, while the clone program would continue, it had been decided that the abduction program would be stepped up, with a forced short-term attacks to increase by 1980 to over 100,000 a year, and the facility to be enlarged for long-term victims, who would stay there for as long as they lived, with numbers over 75,000. The labs at Dulce started cloning human females by a process perfected in the world's largest and most advanced biogenetic facility, Los Alamos. The elite humans who manipulated the world's government from the shadows would soon have a disposable slave race for medical culling of body parts and their own perverted pleasures. Like the alien Greys, the U.S. secret government secretly kidnapped and impregnated young females, then removed the hybrid fetus after a 3-month time period before accelerating their growth in laboratories. Biogenetic DNA manipulation programming was then instilled, many being implanted with all sorts of devices, some that allowed them to be controlled at a distance through RF transmissions. And EDH archives Dulce interview WC-28948734680. Level 7 is worse. It's like a whorehouse for perverted ETs. Human females were brought there for experiments, but you cannot convince me that most of it was not just sadistic pleasure for the Greys. They wouldn't just impregnate the girls, they would torture them for hours. Sure, there was scientific procedures, but there were also orgies, where a few pretty human females would be given to a large number of Greys for nothing less than a brutal. And this was constant. Hundreds of Greys and other species that seemed to be friends to the Greys would come and go for a week. No other reason than just to have pleasure with the provided human females. When the truth was evident that the subhumans and other creatures were being produced from abducted human females, impregnated against their will, a secret resistant group formed within the military and intelligence agencies of the U.S. government that did not approve of the deals that had been made with the off-worlders. Many of these brave humans would be assassinated or die under mysterious circumstances, or would be silenced in other ways. But in 1979, they would manage a victory that would cost the Greys and the humans that backed the Greys dearly. The Air Force intelligence officer that reportedly was the man who met with the aliens at Holman Air Force Base in 1964 was the legendary Dutchman Ellis Lloyd Richards Jr., the same man who would reportedly order the attack on Dulce in 1979, and whose son, Captain Mark Richards, would lead the attack on the facility. The Richards name come up time to time again when one looks into any of the mentioned top-secret projects that military intelligence, or the eyes-only top-secret agencies known as international security, were involved in from World War II through the Cold War years. The in-house political argument that developed within Majestic 12 in the late 70s, when the military intelligence men objected to the deals with some of the aliens on the side for the selfish gain of such groups as the Illuminati of thousands or the Club of Rome at the expense of thousands of innocents, if not all of mankind, helped to cause the rift that would lead to the military action taken against Dulce facility in 1979. Later on in the Dulce battle report, it was written, "It would be one of the reptoids who taught several of the men involved in the attack on Dulce a number of the informative points that would first cause them to look more deeply into what was being done at the facility, and then help them better understand the enemy and how to defeat them. Indeed, it would be this reptoid who communicated the factual basis for a number of the plots being organized against humanity by a number of the off-world sources, and some of them had proven their willingness to aid the human cause in the battle for Central Asia in 1976, and in August of 1979, space defense of Earth against alien invaders. It was also they who warned of a danger that such life forms as bacteria represented to both alien and human. In 1979, there were 37 alien species represented at the Dulce facility. Only 6 of those had their own space or dimensional traveling ability, while the others were guests of the Grey. All of those species that had come as guests of the Grey were there for genetic and reproductive experiments with humans, and 8 of those were also interested in humans as a source of food. Of those interested in reproductive experiments, 25 could enjoy direct intercourse with a human female, although several needed the female to be placed on the special hormone treatments ahead of time, and the facility apparently got the reputation for being a pleasure spot for the quadrant. Of course, not all reptoid-type creatures are friendly towards humans. According to Lear and others, the U.S. government may have made a pact with a non-human race as early as 1933. According to some, this race is not human yet claims to have had its origin on Earth. Some sources allege that this predatory race is of Neo-Saurian nature. This has led others to suggest that the dinosaurs which ruled the surface of the earth in prehistoric times may not have become entirely extinct, as is commonly believed, but that certain of the more intelligent and bipedal hominid mutations of the race developed a form of intellectual thought equal to or surpassing that of the human race. The theory then suggests that some of this race went into space only to return to find that their founders on their home planet had not survived. There were a number of facts quickly put forward. For instance, one branch or mutation of the supposed extinct saurid race was, according to paleontologists, remarkably hominid in appearance, being 3.5 to 4.5 feet in height, with possibly grayish-green skin, and 3-digit clawed hands, and a partially opposable thumb. The opposable thumb and intellectual capacity are the only thing preventing members of the animal kingdom from challenging the human race as the master of planet Earth. For instance, the ape kingdom possesses opposable thumbs, yet it does not possess the intellectual capacity to use them as humans do. The dolphins possess intellect nearing that of a human, but does not possess opposable thumbs or even limbs necessary to build. The cranial capacity of the Stenochrysaurus was nearly twice the size of that of a human being, indicating a large and possibly advanced, though not necessarily benevolent intellect. According to researchers such as Brad Steger, Val Valerin, Tal Valesk, and others, this may actually be the same type of entity or entities commonly described in UFO encounters, as well as same type of creatures depicted in early 1992 in the nationally viewed CBS presentation Intruders. According to Lear, the government may have established a treaty with this reptilian race, which they later learned, to their horror, was extremely malevolent in nature, and were merely using the treaties as a means to buy time while they methodically established certain controls upon the human race, with the ultimate goal of an absolute domination. The fact that a base like Dulce might house dozens of types and races of ETs would never be admitted by most humans, and would be reduced to the stuff of legends if ever turned over to the general public. The years of work to cover up the alien treaty had worked very well by 1979, and normal people would not admit seeing an alien for fear of being called crazy. The types and races that Dulce at the time of the attack were still in question, and many races have not wanted to admit they're taking part in what took place in 1979. Many victims find their abductors to be nothing less than brutal beasts. The casebooks of researchers are filled with incidences in which malice and hostility play a significant role in the abduction. Unfortunately, most of the victims who suffer these more vile attacks do not get the chance to make any report to any human authority about the event, as they vanish and become another statistic in the growing number of missing persons across the country. In the early 70s, the number of these missing people, most of all young white women, were going up, while the abductions of humans by superhuman forces of varying descriptions appeared to obey the same mechanicalism worldwide. It was clear the young white women were the most frequent victims, and that there was little support for abductees should they survive. In the more controlled environment of Dulce, researchers had no disclosure problems concerning stem cell and cloning research. The fertilized eggs of hundreds of healthy young female victims could be harvested constantly for unlimited embryo and stem cell research, killing uncounted human embryos in the search for everything from cures to alien skin infections caused by earth germs, to how better create subhuman slave race of cloned worker creatures. Such research also moved into dangerous fields, such as enhancing humans into becoming creatures that would serve other alien needs. One of the more shocking of these that the attackers would find in huge holding pens were the human females who had been enhanced to become reproductive cows, as the need for human milk and reproductive systems had grown. Hundreds of young women had been altered to become little more than cows. Free will is always dangerous to a fascist society or a police state. Free will is what allowed a group of men to take the moral high ground and attack the Dulce facility. The attack plan, centering on crippling the main generator, then doing as much damage as possible while freeing as many victims as possible, started to take shape in the fall of '79 after the August space battle between forces of the United States Air Force Space Command and an alien invasion force, with none other than Brigadier General Alderholt brought into the head organization that would be formed for the invasion of the Dulce battle. Funded by Texas businessman Ross Perot, CIA, DIA frontman Edwin Wilson, and a massive black op fund long hidden by Major E.L. Richards Jr., the plan moved forward quickly within a small community of intelligence officers and their backers. Brigadier General Harry C. Adderholt would put the team together in September and October of '79. that would have made any commanding officer proud and perhaps shot fear into any enemy who had any idea of what was being put together. Colonel Roger H.C. Donlin, stationed at Fort Leavenworth at the time, would head one combat team drawing heavily from a newly formed Delta Force, Navy SEALs, and USAF Special Operations Command. Flight teams were organized by astronaut scientist Carl Gordon Hennes and include the best of the best in combat and test pilots with special operations training or who could be counted on to keep their silence, including Captain Mark Richards, who was recovering from his command role in Dragon Squadron in the battle that had taken place in August. While the exact number of human force involved are still so protected that there seems to be no firm record of the exact count, there were never more than a few hundred who knew anything about the operation. The center of the operation was clearly found in the USAF Space Command and the director of IS, Major Ellis E. Richards, Jr. The President of the U.S., the Secretary General of the United Nations, the Chairman of the JCS were never informed of a pending operation. And it should be noted that the humans and aliens involved in the attack took part in the action without orders or clearances from higher authorities. Those who fought against the aliens did so against the will of the human elite. One of the men who was hit the hardest by the horrifying stories emerging out of the Dulce underground base was William Randolph Leathers. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, a graduate of Yale in 1941, he served in the OSS as a captain during World War II, teaching map reading in Aberdeen, Maryland, for much of the war. One of the members of the top-secret task force that hit the secret German military facility in Afghanistan in 1945. He had been a close friend of the Dutchman from that time, moving to Green Bay in Marin County, California. In 1967, to be a part of the headquarters team for IS, his cover was an employee with John Hancock Life Insurance Company. Captain Leathers had lost his wife in 1971 and identified with several of the husbands and fathers of victims. He had 4 children of his own. For his own reasons, Captain Leathers died October 22, 2001 at the age of 83. It would be Leathers who worked with NRO satellite photos, U-2 and SR-71 photos, the military maps of the area until all of the major portals to the Dulce complex were spotted and marked. He would lead one of the assault teams himself. Having turned 60 in 1978, Captain Leathers would be the oldest member of the assault team to take an active role in the attack. Most of the troops would come from 3 sources: the Delta Force, U.S. Air Force SOC, the NSA Department Z. The U.S. Army's 1st Special Force Operation Detachment, Delta, would be one of the 2 of the U.S. government's principal unit tasked for counterterrorism operations outside of the U.S., the other being Naval Special Warfare Development Group, better known as SEAL Team 6. Delta Force was created by the United States Army Colonel Charles Beckwith in 1977, November 19th, in direct response to numerous well-publicized terrorist incidents that occurred in the 70s. From the beginnings, Delta was heavily influenced by the British SAS, a philosophical result of Colonel Beckwith's year-long 62-63 exchange tour with that unit. The Delta Force at Bragg was already considered the best special operations training facility in the world. After the assault on Dulce, the CQB indoor training range would be given the ominous nickname House of Horrors in memory of what could not be remembered. Most important, the Delta Force had their own fleet of helicopters, an aviation platoon, Painted in civilian colors and fake registration numbers, the helicopters could deploy with Delta operators and mount gun pods to provide air support as well as transportation, while not being easy to spot as military units from the ground. It was decided that these air units, after delivering Delta operators to several locations for forced entry into the facility, would come in with NSA Z team as air support in the assault on a main landing port. The Air Force Special Operations Command would be in charge of taking and holding the main landing port. The job of AFSOC operators was to quickly turn a given patch of hostile terrain into a fully functional airfield. Sometimes is meant a stealthy attack by motorcycle and ATV. Other times it meant cleaning out hostile forces by whatever means was necessary. In the years to come, an AFSOC Special Tactics Command Controller might have used a Special Operations Force laser marker to create a spot where a laser-guided bomb could aim and neutralize the enemy. But in '79, they had to do that with manpower. Performing a diversified job required a diversified range of combat hardware. Air Force ST operators carried a variety of small arms, including an M9 9mm pistol with sound suppressor, the Remington 870 12-gauge shotgun, the M203 standalone 40mm grenade launcher, the M4A1 SOP MOD Special Operations Peculiar Modification 5.56 carbine, and the M249 5.56 SAW squad automatic weapon. By making extensive tactical use of night vision gear, AFSOC airborne capabilities were provided by the 16th Special Operations Wing, which is based out of Hurlburt Field, Florida, and by units of Special Operations Group at RAF Middlehall, England. These wings had been a long-time vision of Major Ellis L. Richards, Jr., and others like him, and the Dulce battle would be the first time they were used fully in combat. But because of the special problems of entry into Dulce facility, normal helicopter attack would not work. As well trained as they were, to attempt a landing into a hangar area of facility would have been suicidal. Dulce landing ports were set up to accept the light craft and other mass accelerated beam riders used by the Greys to transport from planet to orbit pickup points. These craft generated magneto hydrodynamic thrust driven by microwaves and pulsed lasers to accelerate the classic flying saucers up to altitudes of 50 kilometers and accelerations that easily allowed orbital velocities. This made the human style of liftoff chemical rockets an expensive folly and allowed the aliens Earth-to-orbit travel at will for a relatively low cost. It also gave the human forces a way into the facility. Because an infrastructure of orbiting stations were used to reflect energy from a solar power station hidden on the dark side of the moon, there were a number of ways to track such a ship. The light craft focused the microwave energy to create an air spike that deflected oncoming air that could be tracked, and electrodes on the vehicle's rim that ionized air and formed part of a thrust generating system could be seen by real-time cameras and even the human eye at close range. Thus, it was planned that one of the attack teams would enter the facility when the main port's doors were open for incoming light craft. This was not going to be an easy stunt. Sensors around the area set off an alarm if anything got too close to those doors, not to mention warn the operators of any air or space vehicle that got too close. The mouth was too small for anything larger than a good-sized helicopter, but helicopters would be too slow to reach the doors before the base defensive systems went off. And once inside the port area, any attack force would likely be overwhelmed by the base defenders, unless whatever craft was used could carry a number of heavy automatic weapons and land a large number of attackers at one time. The Greys were quite content that no such craft existed in human military inventory, and not even the Reptoids had a craft that could be used under all the required conditions that wouldn't be spotted long before it could reach the spot. What they hadn't counted on was one single experimental aircraft that was still so secret that it hadn't even entered on an inventory list. Manufactured by the Bell Corporation, the X-22 was a research craft with some interesting abilities. The first successful V/STOL VSS veritable stability system aircraft, this strange mix of wings, jets, and a huge duck prop might not have been pretty, but it was perfect for the mission needs at the Dulce attack force. Because of the lack of time, the only man involved who also had the skill to fly the X-22 under such combat conditions was Captain Mark Richards. Thus he had been chosen to lead Combat Assault Team 3. That would be responsible for attacking the main landing port and hold it long enough for other teams to land in conventional helicopters and for the evacuation of cats and victims when the attack had concluded. According to records, Captain Richards had no more than 12 hours flying the X-22 before he took it into combat. While the attack teams were being organized and trained, the attack itself was being planned by the men responsible for the situation. Objectives and alternatives were picked, including a nuclear option in case the manned attack failed. Astronaut David Griggs was chosen to go with Cat 3 to make an attempt to loot one of the alien spaceships, while astronaut Ronald Irvin McNair went in as Richard's co-pilot and laser weapons expert. The fact that he was a black belt in karate also came in highly helpful before the event was over. Astronaut Lieutenant Colonel Elson S. Onizuka, U.S. Air Force, and Colonel Stuart Allen Rosa, U.S. Air Force, also went in as members of Cat 3 to gather info and hopefully escape with alien ship or equipment. With Cat Colonel Russo, commander of Material Acquisition Team, MAT, none of their efforts could be of value, of course, unless the attack plan worked. To make sure of a success, the full information gathering ability of several top secret departments within the NSA was turned loose on Dulce. Facts were gathered from sources far and wide, including everything from sightings lists in newspapers to interviews with people who had helped build the facility. John V. Chambers, a Kentfield, California resident, spent his working life in management and finance of large engineering construction projects. It would be Chambers who had been involved with the Bechtel work at Dulce and other top secret projects, who would be contacted by the forces that intended to attack Dulce and become convinced to aid them in their effort. It would be Mr. Chambers who would mention a number of weak points in the Dulce systems that would allow the attack to have a much better chance of success. It was Chambers who pointed out major weak points for aliens. It seemed that the aliens had reason to worry about a number of germs found outside the facility, and that some of the alien species were highly vulnerable to a number of human past diseases. The germs and bacteria that are everywhere on the planet that humans and other mammals have, for the most part, developed ways to cope with, can offer great threat to aliens and their life forms. Earth dust or bacteria blowing on winds can be deadly to a life form that has no resistance to such things. What humans refer to as hay fever can be just as deadly to a creature that is having difficult time breathing in the Earth's oxygen-rich atmosphere. It was quickly realized that if the filters used to make the Earth's air more acceptable for the aliens could be disabled, many of the enemy would soon be sick and unable to continue to fight, and a large number might simply die on the spot. Again, for lack of time, Lieutenant Colonel Onizuka took on an extra duty of leading a secondary team inside the main landing port once Cat 3 had secured the area to disable the central air filter exchange that was next to the landing area. He created the title of Filter Assault Team, or FAT, for his group, with his customary smile. As the intelligence gathering expanded, a number of shocking facts were uncovered. In 1947, the Dutchman had been involved with Admiral Byrd in an attack of the last Nazi base at the South Pole. Now he and others would come to a better understand the connections that the elite humans had developed with the aliens from the days of the Nazi effort to modern times. This included help the aliens to build secret bases all over the earth, including the base at the South Pole and the facility at Dulce, aiding in the abduction of young women for alien research and pleasure needs, and the addition of more pollution to the planet's atmosphere to bring on global warming to make the Earth more friendly to the alien life forms. One of the most shocking finds was the extent of the alien underground base and transportation network. While tube trains had been expected, the vast bases that had been created came as a shock to even the best informed officers. The reason such bases became more important now was that the human forces had to quickly find out where every base was that might react to an attack on Dulce, and how long it would take before they would send for rescue forces. Another question was, how would they react in general? Might they attack humanity in some more deadly fashion than simply abducting a few thousand females a year? In the end, it became clear that because of divisions and alien intentions, there was little organization between groups, like a number of competing colleges at a ruin. For the most part, they were only interested in their own little outpost and research. As for the rank-and-file men who took part in the mission, most of the names will be avoided to protect those men who are still alive. As of 2001, there aren't many still alive, and those who are still involved in military operatives in one service or another. Men of the United States Air Force SOC and Delta Force are some of the best trained warriors anywhere on the planet, and were more than ready for the challenge, even if nothing could have made them ready for what they would find once they got into the facility. There are a few general things to know about such men. If one's self-esteem was fragile and required constant positive reinforcement, then a career in any of the organizations was definitely not for that person. Consider a typical Delta Force training exercise held in the shooting house, where making terrorists held a real live volunteer hostage. The goal: destroy the terrorist without harming the hostage, who happened to be a Delta Force trainee. Of course, for special missions, the terrorist mannequin would be replaced by a gray alien. Commander Sergeant Major Eric L. Henley had been there for the formation of the elite group in '78, being there for some of the first missions and grueling training. Within the next 10 minutes, the door would be blown in, and 4 of my classmates would assault the room using close-quarter battle techniques we had learned. Bullets would rain throughout the room, and someone would be firing live rounds within inches of my head. If they missed a single terrorist or hit me by mistake, the team would fail this phase of training. I sincerely wanted them to pass the exam, Hanny wrote in his book, Inside Delta Force, the Story of America's Elite Counter-Terrorist Unit. Of course, one got to participate in this practice session only if one successfully completed torturous training that accumulated in a rugged 40-mile hike across steep mountains of North Carolina, a 50-pound rucksack, and a machine gun strapped on your back. Hanny's description of the 18-hour test of his physical and mental stamina was one of many excellent narratives highlighting in his account. Hanny, an Army Ranger, when he was hand-picked to try out for the elite unit, was one of 12 men out of 163 who made it to level of Delta Force operator. The new Delta Force members then disappeared from the more visible military units. We operated like guerrillas or terrorists because the reality was, in order to become experts at counterterrorism, We had to first become expert terrorists, he wrote. While Haney did not mention the Dulce mission, he did include the failed attempt to rescue Americans held hostage in Tehran, in which 8 American military personnel died. Other missions included some of the world's toughest places, such as a faction-torn Beirut in '81 to guard the U.S. Embassy, quelling rebel insurgents in Central America, including fighting Cuban guerrillas in Grenada, and protecting ambassadors, presidents, CEOs, celebrity prisoners, and the offspring of all of the above. This was not accomplished without killing people, a task that Henley described in chilling detail. Like most of the men involved in the Dulce attack, Haney was a kind guy who worked on your side in a street fight, skilled intelligence and discipline, but distrustful of the motives of some authority figures, especially career-climbing colonels and D.C. bureaucrats, with Beckwith, Leathers, and Donlin leading the 3 land forces, and the SOC men would be attacking under the command of a man most of had never fought beside, but whom most had heard about. Now, for the mission against Dulce, they were under the command of the Dutchman's son, who was something of a legend in his own right in the Black Ops circle. 2 things were beyond question. The younger Richard had proved himself in combat, and he had never asked his men to do anything he was not ready to do, or left any behind. While his missions had almost always been so top secret that nobody knew details, the rumors and trail of evidence was more than clear to anyone in the know. The only problem for the command chain was his reputation for being somewhat of a loose cannon when it came to following orders that he didn't think were in the best interest of his men or the mission, a fact that just made him more popular with his men. In typical command move on his part, he sat in the X-22 with his troops ready to take off on what looked to many to be their last mission. He recited a prayer or poem, "I am a commando," to his men, their motto more than his. As my brother commandos before me, I am proud to step into history as a member of the Air Force Special Operations Command. I will walk with pride with my head held high. My heart and attitude will show my allegiance to God, country, and comrades. When unable to walk another step, I will walk another mile. With freedom my goal, I will step into destiny with pride in the Air Force Special Operations Command. As he powered up the X-22 and gave the order for the helicopters to follow, he pushed the strange tilt-rotor aircraft to its flight limits in a wild high-speed bank over the runway to impress the troops still on the ground and set the tone for the mission. Over the earphones and speakers came first his voice, then the voice of the team members with him in the X-22, singing the Air Force hymn, "Up and Away into the Wild Blue Yonder." "We couldn't very well let a bunch smash open the gates of hell without the rest of us being right behind them," said one United States Air Force helicopter pilot. Timing was everything, with the X-22 taking the first wave of CAT-3 racing over the desert at over 250 miles an hour, with the bottom of its rotor tubes missing the rocks by less than 20 feet at times. They had to hit the main landing port as an expected ship landed, as Cat-1 and Cat-2 came in to the cargo tube trains several levels underground. Cat-4 was going to hit with SEAL team coming through the water intake as the main group hit a small support hatch and would allow them to open another hatch to allow the SEAL team in. Everything, however, revolved around the success of Cat-3's attack in the main landing port, as they had to remove the main security control room and the Sonics weaponry system that were controlled from there. The X-22 came in as planned, racing over the Badlands at over 200 miles an hour, while less than 20 feet off the sand. 5 miles behind her was the main assault force being flown in heavy Air Force helicopters. The timing had to be perfect. Hanging on the timely arrival of a large disc-like vehicle, that was known and expected cargo shuttle from space. As observed, the main landing port blanketed holographic projectors were turned off, and the entry blast doors were opened for the landing shuttle. Witnesses said that Richards brought the X-22 so tightly that its landing gear missed touching the top of the moving disc by only inches, lowering his rotoring craft with the disc until he had cleared the upper support girder system. Then the X-22 shot around the side of the shuttle, using it to block any attack by the main gun mounts in the landing port. The X-22 fired its Hellfire rockets to smash 2 gun blisters on the close side of the port as it landed on the roof of the main port control facility. The attack was textbook, with the Cat-4 forces blowing an entry into the control tower and taking full control of that facility within 55 seconds of the X-22 breaching the port. Hovering, the X-22 continued to use its rockets and guns to rake any enemy weapons in the port area, silencing them before the Air Force started to enter the open port doors. It was Ted Cochran of San Rafael, California, who had been an Air Force helicopter rescue commander in the HH-43 Huskies based in Saigon in the height of the Vietnam conflict. Licensed since the age of 18 as a pilot, Cochran also served with the Air Force in Europe, where he had participated in a recovery of a lost thermonuclear weapon. In Spain, on one of his last helicopter missions before his legal retirement from the U.S. Air Force, he was part of a recovery force for the Apollo 9 mission after the moon landing in '69. Returning to California, he'd gotten his master's degree in communications from Stanford in '72 and became a well-known filmmaker. A sailor, outdoorsman, and aviator, Cochran combined his spirited passions into a career that allowed him to share his adventures with film audiences. His best-known films was Island of the Bounty, about an international sailing expedition that traced the 1789 route of the famed HMS Bounty mutineers to Pitcairn Island in the South Pacific. At the age of 39, Cochran was in his prime and had been more than willing to accept the request for his help as a helicopter pilot in some event like Dulce. The fact that he was a longtime friend of Richard's family seemed to have something to do with his involvement as well. Indeed, it was rumored that he had taught the Dutchman how to fly the big HH-43 Husky and had flown in Black Op missions with Dutchman's son several times before. He was one of the first names to be considered as a pilot. It was Cochran who led the United States Air Force AF-SOC helicopters in, bringing his bird in fast and putting her down on the main floor of the chamber, where the troops would have the cover of the nearby disc as they ran for the nearby passenger entry hatch. Seeing that the landing disc was now trying to escape, Richards landed on its edge and kicked the props of the X-22 into full downdraft, nearly flipping the disc. Fighting to regain control of the X-22, he was forced to make a hard landing on the nearby pad, sending 4 more rockets into the shuttle, forcing it to crash onto 2 parked triangular crafts that were known to be fighter-type vehicles. Although the men of Cat-3 were now taking heavy weapon fire from a number of directions in the landing port, they had disabled the main weapon pods and the sonic systems for the whole facility, allowing the other teams to attack from different directions and locations. Holographic image systems were shut off, so the entry ports, air shafts, and other systems that were normally hidden now became fully exposed. An alien security team had managed to close the main doors into the central hub, and the first 2 men who attempted to get explosives close enough to damage the huge blast doors were cut down by enemy fire. Taking heavy damage, the X-22 rolled forward and from less than 40 yards fired her remaining rockets. The resulting explosion blew the doors open and wiped out any alien on the other side for 100 feet. Forced to feather the now burning engines of the X-22, Richards took command of one of the Cat's 3 attack teams and led the attack through the still smoking entry into the main central hub. as other teams attacked from other directions. The multi-leveled facility at Dulce, with its central hub controlled by an extensive base security force, proved far more extensive and complex than human attackers had been ready to cope with in the original plan. Information sources like Thomas Costello had clearance levels that did not allow them to know the full scope of the operation. His Ultra 7 clearance granted him knowledge of 7 known sublevels. There were more. Most of the aliens supposedly were on levels 5, 6, and 7, but there were more. There also was a more vast network of shuttle connections underground than expected, extending into a global network that had not been reported, providing escape routes and entry ports for rapidly deployed additional security forces that had not been expected. In a report filed in the early 80s, believed by a number of CI sources to have been written by Brigadier General Adderholt, the author states, "What those young men did was nothing less than the stuff of legend. Against overwhelming numbers and technology, they fought from level 1, containing the garage and hangars, down into the bowels of the enemy base. Portions of the command took and held level 2 ports, where tunnel shuttles and disk maintenance area would have allowed the enemy reinforcements to enter, while the main force charged forward towards level 6 and Nightmare Hall to rescue thousands of human victims kept there. They were not ready for what they found in level 6. Reports spoke of multi-armed and multi-legged humans in cages and vats, of humanoid bat-like creatures as tall as 7 feet. The aliens had learned a great deal about genetics, things both useful and frightening, and most of it had been learned at the cost of human suffering and lives. Captain Leather's flight reached level 7 first, blowing the main hub entrance open and neutralizing the security force there with extreme prejudice in less than 45 seconds. On entering the security station, they realized the extent of the facility for the first time, finding systems for watching and controlling over 30,000 captives on that one level alone. And the control and security systems for moving captives to testing facilities and pleasure centers in over 62 different locations, where another 4,600 captives were currently held. Captain Leather's report to IS would mention the moment. "I looked out over a holographic image of scenes of horror that were impossible to express in words, and a zoo of human beings in various states of health and mental condition. Seeing images of young women being tortured at that very moment, all I could think of were my own daughters for several moments. Then I collected my wits and gave the order to move forward and release as many victims as we could. While the original mission plan had called for teams to attack, smash as much enemy facility as we could, and withdraw in less than a half an hour, the introduction to so many human victims added a new dimension to the problems at hand. While none of the officers in charge will admit to who made the order, recorded radio communications and eyewitness reports seem to suggest that Alderhoff allowed the young Richards to change the mission demands as the number of salvable victims became more apparent. Captain Leather's IS report reads, "It wasn't like we had choices. We couldn't leave those poor girls behind alive. We knew that any that we didn't evacuate, we were going to have to terminate. The only problem was simply numbers. Thousands of aliens trying to kill us, thousands of human females screaming for help, thousands more so far gone that we knew we would have to leave them behind. Thousands of enemy troops started to arrive on subway trains. We just weren't set up for the mass evacuation. The sub-tube back to New York and one to Mexico seemed to still be open, so we started loading girls into the tube trains and shooting them off as soon as we knew our forces were in control of the stations on the other end. We blew 2 air shafts wide open so a couple squads could get the girls out that way into fresh air, where hopefully our people could pick them up. Cat 4 took a real beating as they fought to keep alien reinforcements from entering the main sub-tube station. There is no doubt in my mind that we stayed in that facility too long, but at the time it was very hard to leave those poor young women behind. We knew that everyone who failed to send out in the front of you was going to die, and soon. Exactly 1 hour after X-22 had first attacked the main port entry, Alderholt ordered a full recall. David Griggs and R.E. McNair had by then managed to get 2 alien craft airborne, 1 disc craft and 1 of the most highly advanced triangular fighting craft, and were running for Area 51. Rosa's men also had managed to get a huge disc-like shuttle moving, in which over 3,600 human females had been loaded and were now being taken to a safe base. The human attack teams were now withdrawing behind the walls of smoke and set explosions. One of the frightening bits of equipment that the Mat men had found had been forced to leave behind. It was a type of cell electrostatic disruption, or SED device, a weapon that could be set to disrupt the cells of a living creature at a subatomic level, thus killing everything living in the area while not doing much harm to any structures or equipment. To make sure there would be no survivors left in the facility, that device was set by the MAT technicians to go off shortly after a full withdrawal of the attack teams. Lieutenant Colonel E.S. Unzuka, who led Filter Attack Team, managed to repair the X-22's battle damage before taking command of a captured alien triangular fighting craft. As the wounded Richards fought a running retreat with the last of the rescued females and the survivors of Cat 4 and Cat 3, Unzuka provided cover fire from an alien fighter craft. This gave Richards time to reach and restart X-22 as Colonel Donlin loaded the last victim, as he had 2 of his men fought off attacking alien shock troops, nearly overwhelmed the human fighters, in the X-22 would have likely not made it out into the air if, at that moment, several battlecraft hadn't darted into the port facility and started to lay down a brutal fire pattern against other aliens. While one can only guess at the reasons for this sudden aid, it has long been reported that the Dutchman and his son had highly questionable off-world contacts. From eyewitness accounts of battlecraft, one had the symbols of its wings of what human experts in the field suggest mark the craft as belonging to something like a prince of a royal house. Whatever the case, the reptile battlecraft fought on the side of the humans. Indeed, 2 of their craft were lost in the battle and gave the X-22 and Unazuka's fighter craft, the last 2 helicopters, a chance to escape. 72 minutes and 14 seconds after the attack had started, the X-22 and the reptile battlecraft with princely markings cleared the landing port's blast doors and dashed for safety. Explosions from dozens of set bombs started to blow enemy craft as they took off, and 35 seconds after they cleared the doors, the CED went off, causing every life form, alien and human, left inside that facility to demolecularize at a subatomic level. Only a few in the heavily shielded lowest sheltered levels survived. The human female survivors were taken to several top-secret military bases, where they were deprogrammed and rehabilitated so that they could be slowly farmed back into society with no memory of what they had suffered. As the mysterious Commander X stated, "From my own intelligence work within the military, I can say with all certainty that one of the main reasons the public has been kept in total darkness about the reality of UFOs and aliens is that the truth of the matter actually exists too close to home to do anything about. How could a spokesman for the Pentagon dare admit that 5 to 10,000 feet underground exists an entire world that is foreign to a belief structure we have had for centuries? How could, for example, our fastest bomber be any challenge for those aerial invaders when we can only guess about the routes they take to the surface, eluding radar as they fly so low heading back to their underground lair? The Greys, or the EBEs, have established a fortress spreading out to other parts of the U.S. via means of vast underground tunnel systems that has virtually existed before recorded history. All of the men involved in any attack teams were either mind-wiped or sworn to secrecy on pain of death or terminated. Because the officers in charge were seen as heroes by many of the political right wing that took control of Washington in 81, most were protected by the changing political elite. Many of those who had either openly backed the alien cause or had profited from it in any way or another were forced to pull back from their position for nearly 10 years. Only when George Bush Sr. became president were the aliens able to return, and then only in a much smaller number. The Battle of Dulce ended the alien hope for using Earth as a breeding tank for subspecies for their takeover of the planet at any time in the near future, while the Greys restarted the breeding program in 93, and some of the lower levels of Dulce facility were reopened in 98. The numbers are in the tens of hundreds rather than thousands. The United States Air Force Space Command now tracks all alien craft, with the constant threat that top-secret flights can react and attack an otherworldly enemy at any moment, with dramatic results. Over 50 years of intense UFO interest, investigation, research, evaluation, and theorizing by countless UFO aficionados have enabled modern field investigators to better examine, evaluate, and identify many of the unusual airborne objects that are being reported. Yet a small percentage of the reports continue to elude positive identification. Rumors of what took place in Dulce in 79 have already been reduced to legend at the end of the 20th century. Indeed, the continued con men involved in such reports have helped the United States Air Force cover the truth of the events that took place at Dulce and continue to aid in the effort to hide the ruined facility and those who took part in the events. Men like intelligence officer William Cooper, who have become too loose with their knowledge of the truth, can be discredited in a number of ways or terminated if they become too great of a threat, which he was. It should be clear from their actions and their willingness to challenge authority that these men must never be allowed in such position of power or authority again, or rather such is mindset of a human or shape-shifting elite. While Dutchman was terminated in 96 and his son will be in prison for the rest of his life, the mindset itself that created such men must be crushed if the human race is to know peace with aliens. The illusion of freedom that may be lost by those few who know what is really going on will be a worthy exchange for amazing technology that will come into the hands of the human elite, so they reason that takes part in the new transfer. This may not take place easily, of course, until all human resistance has been removed either through retaining or through conquest. One of the key lessons to be learned from the Dulce battle is as long as there is a small, highly trained and well-equipped human force that can, may, or will go into action on their own accord to protect the people of Earth, easy conquest of the planet becomes difficult. A departmentalized military with some branches so top secret that even the political elite who rule the country are not sure of what is out there is a threat to any enemy. At this time, there are arms of the United States Air Force Space Command so top secret that no one in the Pentagon knows that they even exist. It's anything but a legend. If humanity is to survive long enough to take a historic place in the civilized social structure of the universe, they must either defend themselves from any life form that would harm them or their planet, or surrender themselves to some sort of interplanetary police force that will protect them. At this time, only rumors of such a police force have reached those in the know, leaving self-defense the only real option. The men who attacked Dulce's facility in 79 understood the reality and took the task of defending humanity in their own hands. One can only make subjective guesses at what might have happened if they had not done what they had done. Players in this battle: Brigadier General H.C. Alderholt, Mission Commander; Colonel Charles Beckwith, Commander of Delta Force and Cat 1; J.V. Chambers, Engineer of Bechtel; William Cooper, Intelligence Officer; Colonel R.H.C. Donlin, Commander Cat 4; David Griggs, Astronaut, Liberated UFO; Command Sergeant Major E.L. Haney, Delta Force Commander and Writer; General R.T. Harris, Commander of the United States Air Force Communications Command at Scott Air Force Base 3; Carl Gordon Hennes, Organized Mission Flight Teams; General D.C. Jones, Chairman Joint Chief of Staff; Captain W.R. Leathers, Commander Cat 2; R.E. McNair, Laser Expert, Liberated UFO; Lieutenant Colonel E.S. Onizuka, Commander of FAT, Liberated UFO; Ross Perot, helped fund the mission; Major E.L. Richards Jr., the Dutchman, Commander-in-Chief of Dulce Mission, Head of IS; Captain M. Richards, Commander of Cat 3; Colonel S.A. Rosso, Commander MAT; Edwin Wilson, helped fund the mission. Terms: CAT, Combat Assault Team; FAT, Filter Attack Team; MAT, Material Acquisition Team; IS, International Security; VAT, Victim Assistance Team; CUT, Cleanup Team. Here's a couple of things that I want people to think about that doubt this happened. Okay? Why do we have Space Force? That's just really, honestly, why do we have Space Force if there is nothing to be afraid of out in outer space? Elon Musk and his boring company create tubes that run from, I think the first one was Vegas. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? What's he up to? Is he on our side or is he on their side? Who knows? He's awful smart. And he seems to change sides very quickly. If you think about it, he was a Democrat. Now he's a Republican. Is that to pull the wool over our eyes, or is that to help humanity? I hope it's to help humanity. But honestly, really, who knows? You really can't trust someone like that, can we? Hopefully we can. But there are so many more just little things that add up to the proof that this really happened. Too many people have died. Think about it. Phil Schneider, dead. Thomas Costello, disappeared or dead. William Cooper, dead. And I gave a pause for William Cooper because my dad loves that guy. He has read Behold the Pale Horse like 3 different times. He's actually stolen my book twice and not given it back once. The Dutchman terminated, and his son in prison for the rest of his life. How nuts is that? Ross Perot ran for president. Should have won. Things are weird. But you know what? Reality is stranger than fiction, my friends. This one is to you, Bob Lee. May the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.